Good afternoon, everyone. After 1 week at the Capitol, I wanted to give you all a summary of where things are at. So, the 2019-2020 legislative session got off to quite a contentious start. Each body, the House and the Senate, passes their own rules of decorum at the start of every 2-year cycle, of which we are at the beginning of. Most of these rules are about the quorum required to convene the Senate, that is, the minimum amount of senators that must be present for the Senate to do business, plus things like duties of the various leadership roles, how voting works, those sorts of logistical and structural issues. The Senate sort of decided to make it retroactively okay that a bunch of state troopers arrested the Georgia 15 during Song's event this past November, demanding that every vote be counted. Bonus, they also created an ethics body to review sexual harassment complaints. Sounds good on its surface, right? Except it includes fairly strict rules on when complaints can get filed. Folks only have 2 years to file a complaint and cannot file a complaint while someone is actively running for office. These new rules also explicitly lay out some harsh punishment if a complaint is deemed frivolous. Quote, "This has CYA written all over it." Some exciting news. Women now make up 31% of the legislature. We now have one of the largest women's caucuses in the nation, in addition to having one of the largest, if not the largest, black legislative caucus in the nation. The women of the Senate went in on the brand new leadership's choices over the past few days from the well, that is, from the podium on the Senate floor where senators speak from, the well. Their comments primarily focused on the lack of women serving on the most important committees, that is, those that make decisions on the vast majority of legislation. This came after Senator Renee Unterman, who you may recall tried to stop the rape kit testing bill from going through, was stripped of her chairmanship of the powerful Health and Human Services Committee. If I can dive into the weeds on this a little bit. Unterman ran her committee like a little fiefdom, as do many important committee chairs. Let's make sure to talk about the Rules Committee another time as a prime example of this. There are some great legislative reforms that she passed through, regardless of the support she had from her caucus. That's a big deal, and many Democratic women took to the well to thank her for helping on healthcare issues that were important in their districts. But she also used her power to block some important legislation and pass some harmful bills as well. I also want to note that while she was the only woman allowed access to power, she had no problem with the status quo. Nonetheless, it was powerful to witness both Republican and Democratic women speak out in the Senate against their lack of representation on the most important committees, let alone their lack of equitable access to leadership positions. It's unlikely that the Senate will make any changes to the new rules they passed or to the committee assignments, but we can definitely expect more public outcry from this, at least from Senator Unterman. Now let's talk rumors. Here's the gossip around the halls. The legislature will want to keep up appearances of being a totally reasonable body until after the Super Bowl. In other words, don't expect the really bad stuff to start until after February 3rd. This likely only applies to legislators that follow their caucus's orders. In this case, I'm using caucus to refer to Republican or Democratic caucus rather than the Women's Caucus, the Rural Caucus, the Black Legislative Caucus, etc. Just strictly talking party. So we don't have Josh McCoon this year, but we'll soon find out who will metaphorically fill his seat as a party-pissing-off rabble-rouser. Of the 40-day session, only the dates for the first 11 days have been announced. This takes us to the week after the Super Bowl. And bless their hearts, they have given themselves the Monday after Super Bowl off to recover from whatever hangovers may ensue. Other rumors. Representative Ginny Earhart, who has taken over the seat of her husband Earl Earhart, is rumored to be a top candidate to sponsor RFRA in the House. As you may recall, this is the so-called religious freedom legislation that the likes of Georgia Equality and their allies have been fighting hard against every year. I have also heard that Senator William Ligon's name is a potential candidate to sponsor similar legislation in the Senate. And now for some concerning items that aren't rumors. Representative Jesse Petraea, who is from the Savannah area, has already committed to dropping some nasty anti-immigrant legislation. He wants to combine a few nasty pieces of legislation from the past that didn't succeed, but definitely took a lot of fight to get them to not pass. One part of this is requiring all law enforcement agencies to comply with ICE detainers. Detainers are when ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ask a local jurisdiction to hold a person in jail beyond what the local law allows, so that ICE can ultimately take custody of this person. Because immigration is an issue that the federal government has authority over, there have already been questions about the legality of asking, let alone requiring local cops to enforce immigration-related laws. I'll post a link to a blog post I previously wrote about that relies on the expertise of Azadeh Shashahani to talk about this issue. If you're not already following Azadeh on social media, you should. Okay, so not only does Representative Petraea want to force cooperation with ICE, which is questionable as to how legal that is, he's also reviving the idea of creating a registry. Yes, that is exactly as scary as it sounds. He wants to, and I quote, require the State Department of Corrections to make public a list of the total non-citizen prison population, their home countries, and their immigration status, and update the list every 90 days. This means that when people who are legally banned from obtaining a driver's license are caught driving without a license, because we all have to get to work, get groceries, pick up our kids, take our parents to doctor's appointments, etc., their data will become part of a public database. I will also post a link to the op-ed he wrote about his plans so you can read for yourself exactly what he wants to see happen. Okay. Some positives. Democrats in both the House and the Senate have dropped, that is introduced, constitutional amendments to make that whole Kemp overseeing his whole election debacle never happen again. The Senate version explicitly targets the Secretary of State's office. Yes. While the House version more broadly covers any elected official being required to vacate their current seat if they qualify, that is, if they officially declare they are running for another office. There's a couple of other nice bills with a large list of co-sponsors, although when the lead sponsors and most of the co-sponsors are Democrats, that does not bode well for a particular piece of legislation going far. But sometimes if a bill is popular enough, Republicans will basically take the exact same bill, put Republican sponsors on it, and then it will get passed. So a few bills to look at. Representative Debbie Buckner's HB 8 would exempt menstrual products from the state sales tax. It's a way of recognizing that, like needles to inject insulin for a diabetic, this is an absolutely necessary purchase that covers someone's healthcare needs in a very basic and fundamental way, and the state shouldn't make money off of it. I was happy to see that the bill defines menstrual products more broadly than just pads and tampons. A+. For those of you who are federal employees impacted by the furloughs, both Republicans and Democrats have at least indicated some level of concern for your well-being. SB 27, that is Senate Bill 27, which is led by Democrats but does have at least one high-ranking Republican co-sponsor, would explicitly allow furloughed federal employees to qualify for unemployment. If I may take a moment to note what's happening at the federal level, newly elected Congresswoman Lucy McBath spoke in favor of legislation to give furloughed employees access to short-term loans with a 0% interest rate. Back to state stuff. In SB 10, we see Dems once again trying to amend state laws to make possession of a small amount of marijuana a misdemeanor that carries a fine. Many of the conservatives who have come around to backing medical marijuana fear this gateway drug That's a quote from Speaker Ralston. So I'd be surprised if this bill moves forward. Also, shout out to Representative Park Cannon for HB 5. This bill says that employers should not rely on salary history when determining wages for new hires. Using salary history is a common way that both gender and racial disparities in pay get upheld, even as workers move to new jobs. Our outdated voting machines are also finally getting some attention. The Secure, Accessible, and Fair Elections Commission just released their report with eight whole recommended policy changes to improve election security and transparency. I'll post a link to that report as well. As a state with one of the most counties in the nation, buying new voting machines is going to be quite an expensive endeavor. Vendors of various voting technologies are all currently trying to woo the state. There's been a lot of rumors about how corrupt this process has been so far, and I'm still digging into it all. So I'm hesitant to make any assessments about this right now. Last but not least, His Excellency, Governor Brian P. Kemp and the new Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan are starting to show their colors a bit more. Lieutenant Governor Duncan is really obsessed with policymaking by empowering the 4 C's to address critical issues in our state. Those are churches, charities, corporations, and citizens. I forever will not understand why people who do not think the government has a role in proactively and positively improving people's lives want to serve in any office, let alone high-powered ones like Lieutenant Governor. Other than, of course, that they followed God's paths or heeded God's call or whatever. It's strange how only white men seem to get the call in this state. Kemp. Oh boy. School safety is becoming a big issue. Kemp, Duncan, and Speaker Ralston have all talked about it. Kemp is including one-time funds of $30,000 per school, that's $69 million total, in school security grants. The other top approach to school safety is addressing mental health. Much needed, for sure. But there has not been a single mention of the other G word, guns. Given the total lack of a racial justice analysis by our state leaders, I'm expecting whatever these policy changes end up being to play out like any other security theater in this country. Students of color will disproportionately be impacted and will face more state-sanctioned violence. On the healthcare front, Medicaid waivers are looking more and more likely. Republicans have backed themselves into a corner over Medicaid expansion, but as rural hospitals continue to close and rural Georgians continue to face significant hurdles in accessing healthcare, leaders are finding that they have to do more than just talk about how much they care about rural Georgians. A line you might recognize from Stacey Abrams and other progressive leaders is now coming out the mouth of Governor Kemp. In his inaugural address, his comments to the Georgia Chamber of Commerce, and his State of the State address, he's mentioned that every Georgian should have access to quality schools and quality health care, regardless of their zip code. Oh, and don't we forget to mention that Kemp promised in his State of the State address to I am committed to addressing the rise of gang activity in our state, a growing threat requiring our immediate attention. He also added that these gangs are pawns for Mexican drug cartels, pushing opioids and drugs, buying and selling children for sex. If that isn't some racist bullshit, then I don't know what is. I also want to share that I recently learned from a criminal justice reform advocate about gang databases and how highly problematic they are. In addition to how racist these sort of systems tend to be, getting on one of these gang-based databases is super arbitrary and subjective. You post a selfie on Facebook with someone who is on this database and suddenly you're a gang affiliate. It's also really hard to get yourself taken off this database once you're on it. I hope to dive into this issue as the session unfolds more. Next week is all budget hearings, so if you are also a policy wonk, be prepared to nerd out. Follow me on Twitter at capital_REB, and yes, that is a Jewish pun. Lastly, I'll be setting up a way for folks to support my work, so I'm not just a broke-ass queer scraping together rent money from freelance reporting gigs. So please be on the lookout for that. Donate and share widely. That's all I have for y'all this week. Post any comments or questions below, and I'll do my best to address them. For now, I'm going to go pay some bills, live my best food stamps life while I can, and get ready for a nice, long queer weekend away from the hellhole that is our state capital. Bye, everyone.